Hello, good afternoon. This is Brett Lonsdale from Lightning Tools, and welcome to another webinar. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about one of our products known as the Data Viewer, and we're going to take a look at the Data Viewer and how it works as its own product. So how we can use that to connect to different data sources and bring some data into Microsoft SharePoint and also Microsoft Teams in the format of a report, or also as a chart as well. And then we're also going to take a look at how the data viewer can also work in conjunction with some of our other products, like the Lightning Conductor for displaying charts on aggregated content, also against things like Social Squared, and also Lightning Forms as well. So the data viewer is a great product to really sort of bring a lot of the best out of some of our other tools that we have on offer. So first of all, before we get started, what I want to do is just, first of all, welcome you. Welcome to the webinar, and also give you a little bit of background as to who we are at Lightning Tools, just in case this is the first time you've joined one of our meetings, and then we're going to get started through some live demonstrations. So as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at the Data Viewer this afternoon, and this is a product that can work in the format that I'm going to display it in anyway, in SharePoint Online, also Microsoft Teams, and SharePoint 2019. So if you are using the modern experience inside of SharePoint 2019, you can take full advantage of the Data Viewer as you'll see it today. If you are using an older version of SharePoint on premises, such as SharePoint 2016 or SharePoint 2013, we also have a WSP version, a classic version, if you like, of the Data Viewer as well, and that has very similar capabilities, albeit it's a slightly different user interface and so on, and a few different types of options, but the same functions will be available for you in SharePoint 2013 and 2016, but we're going to be taking a look at the modern SPFx version of the Data Viewer today. So yeah, first of all, just to introduce you to myself. So my name is Brett Lonsdale. I'm the co-founder of Lightning Tools, which is something that we founded back in 2007, and also the co-founder of another company called Enlightning as well. So it's a sister company to Lightning Tools, and Enlightning is basically a coaching company. So we help you to build solutions, whether that's in the Power Platform, in SharePoint, and also in Teams. So we'll discover your needs, and rather than you attend a training course or you try to discover yourself what content you may need to research, we can basically help you with all of that to point you in the right direction and help guide you to building your solution. You'll also hear me on a podcast as well, known as Techsplaining. So you can go reach out to techsplaining.net, and also find us on Spotify and places like that. And yeah, last but not least, I'm also a Microsoft Office Apps and Services MVP. So what was known as a SharePoint MVP has now evolved into Office Apps and Services. So what we're going to be talking about initially is what is the pain point that we're solving here with the Data Viewer. What's the challenge that we're going to try and overcome? So one of the pain points is actually the fact that in any business, it doesn't matter how big or small your business, you're likely to be suffering from the pain of having different silos of data. And those silos that I'm referring to are basically software applications that usually store data somewhere. And those databases may be backing up something like Sage for accounting. So of course, if you build a company, you may use something like Sage, or you may use Xero, or whatever it might be as an accounting piece of software. And then inside your sales team, you might be using something like Salesforce or HubSpot. Inside your warehouse management or production, you might be using something else entirely, even a custom database that may be driven through Oracle or Microsoft SQL or something along those lines. So the idea is that, of course, inside a business, we're going to choose the best software we can in order to help our department or our division of our organization to function. But what we don't want to do is, of course, train everybody inside the organization on the sales system and train everybody in the organization on the accounting system and so on, if that's not a requirement. We're going to basically have those that need that functionality in their day-to-day jobs to use that software. And the challenge that comes out of that is when you try to get an overall vision as to how well is my company performing. So yeah, how well are we doing inside of sales, and does that reflect how well we're doing in accounts as well? So yeah, do we have the cash flow as well as the sales revenue coming in? So that would be something that would be an ideal dashboard to see, so that we can actually measure the health of our organization. And the ideal place for that to happen is exactly where we're collaborating, exactly where we're working, and that is inside of SharePoint and also inside of Teams as well. So that's one of the pain points that we suffer from. Is it's almost like blind spots inside a business where we can't see how well a particular part of the business is performing unless we have some form of reports or some sort of visual as to what those functions are looking like and what the data is looking like. So that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today with the data viewer, is how we can overcome that challenge by connecting to some of these different systems and displaying that data in a data report and also inside a chart here in SharePoint and also in Teams. So that's one of the challenges. There's a couple of other challenges that are more of a technical nature, and that is that some of you, if you're as old as me, may have used in the past something known as Excel services. At some point in time, this got dropped. I think it was SharePoint 2013. But Excel services used to be a great tool where you could connect SharePoint to an Excel workbook, and that Excel workbook had to reside inside a SharePoint document library somewhere. But you could connect to it, and then you could display aspects of that Excel workbook or Excel file inside of SharePoint using an Excel services web part. And you could display a chart, or you could display a table of data inside your SharePoint environment, so that people could actually see what's going on from that Excel file without actually having to open up the Excel file. So this is something that no longer exists, and Microsoft is pushing you, I guess, really towards using something like Power BI for that. So we could use Power BI to connect to Microsoft Excel, and you, of course, could build some visualizations on that Excel file and then share them on a SharePoint page using the Power BI web part, or also promote that as a dashboard that's displayed inside of Teams as well. But all of that, first of all, comes with quite a high cost to use Power BI in the first place. If you're going to be sharing your reports or sharing your workspaces. So there is the cost implication, but there's also positioning the data viewer versus Power BI. We're really looking at something that is a bit more simplified when we're looking at the data viewer. This is something that more simple in this case is a benefit to somebody that has an Excel document, or has a connection to a SharePoint list, or has a connection to some form of OData service that wants to basically build a chart that is dynamic. It's going to refresh with the data changing, and just simply display it on a page without having to have much complications about modeling that data and doing everything else that you need to do inside of Power BI. And that is not discrediting Power BI at all. I absolutely love Power BI. It's a fantastic tool. Sometimes it's a bit of overkill depending on what you want to do inside your department. If you've got a simple SharePoint team site and you want to show your sales revenue, and that sales revenue is recorded inside an Excel report or something along those lines, we can absolutely use the data viewer for that. And another comparison would be also with the chart web part that comes out of the box with SharePoint Online, which is something that you can create simple charts with, but they're not dynamic. They're not linked to the data source. So, of course, reporting on annual revenue is something that we could easily put together a little table, show our annual revenue over the last 10 years or something like that, and you'll be able to plot that onto a graph. And you only have to update it once a year. But if we wanted to do that on monthly revenue or quarterly revenue, we don't want to have to keep on going into this web part and editing the properties of it and keying in the sales revenue every single time a new order comes in. We want that to be dynamic and up to date, and displaying the most up to date revenue point. So that's the sort of thing that we can do with the data view, is we can point it to a data source and we maintain that live connection. So as we receive new orders, that's being reflected inside the chart on the SharePoint page. So some of you may have also used business connectivity services in the past, and this is also something that Lightning Tools has specialized in with its product BCS MetaMan. BCS MetaMan being a tool that helps you to connect to different external data sources like Oracle and so on, and then you can use the BCS web parts or the search configuration or the external data column and what have you against that external data source as well. So that was solving a similar problem where we could bring in these silos of data into SharePoint using business connectivity services. But one of the challenges that we have now is that business connectivity services hasn't really stayed up to date with the modern experience. So you look at an external list and it looks very SharePoint 2013-y, and you have a look at the external data column and it's also an old style lookup column and so on. So if you want to maintain this sort of fresh modern feel that's responsive and so on, and also integrate that with Teams as well, then that's something that the data viewer can do for you. And if you also happen to already use business connectivity services, you can use the data viewer against a business connectivity services external content type as well. So you can reuse that connection with the data viewer, and that's something that we'll touch on as we go through this. So that's really sort of positioning it. It's a way of building charts, building reports with inside of SharePoint and Teams. And that's the reason behind it, to overcome some of these challenges that we face in business where we've got lots of different silos of data. So what we're going to do through the demonstrations today, we're going to take a look at how the data viewer can connect, first of all, to a Microsoft SQL database that's stored in SQL Azure. So we'll connect to a database there, and I'm going to demonstrate how we can build a simple data report with some conditional formatting and perhaps grouping and things like that, and also how you can edit and delete the data if you wanted to. Of course, you need to choose carefully whether you're going to enable or disable that function, but I'll show you how we can accomplish that using the data viewer. And we'll also have a look at reporting against some OData sources as well. And OData is a great mechanism for taking data that is on premises, so maybe in an Oracle database or something like that, or DB2, and exposing that through a service that we can consume in the cloud. So that's something we could also do with the data viewer, is connect to the OData service to present our data. And once we've accomplished that, we're going to move away from data reports and onto charts. So we'll look at building some charts around an Excel document, also some charts around an OData service as well. And then finally, we're going to move into connecting the data viewer to some of the other Lightning Tools products. So things like the Social Squared discussion board, so we can actually report against the usage and how well our forums are performing. We'll also look at building charts against Lightning Conductor aggregated content, which allows me to therefore build charts on SharePoint lists and libraries that have been aggregated, and also on Microsoft Graph content as well. And also Lightning Forms and Lightning Filters is a couple of other areas that we'll take a look at. And we're going to wrap up with what's new in this version. So if you're already a customer of the data viewer, you'll be able to see what we've just released just yesterday. So you can download that new version and start to play around with it inside your SharePoint environment as well. So we'll talk about that as we get there. Okay, so let's jump in. First of all, I feel like I've just actually told you everything that's on this slide. So yeah, we'll just rattle through this quickly. But yeah, basically the data viewer is a modern SPFx web part. It can be configured by business users. That's an important point to make. This is not something that you have to be a member of the IT team to be able to do. You're not going to be required to write code. You're not going to need to be a business intelligence expert. It's something that if you're a site owner or a team owner, you can go through and configure a chart against one of your Excel documents or against one of your lists, or also against one of the other external systems if you have access to it. So that could be, again, things like OData or SQL. We'll also look at building the data viewer in Teams as well. So you can actually add this either as a web part on a SharePoint page or as a tab inside your team. And there's a couple of ways of doing that. So you can add the data viewer itself as a tab, or you could also expose an entire page of data viewers that is a SharePoint page and display that inside of Teams as well. So you get more of a dashboard type display with inside one of your Teams tabs. We'll take a look at building the data reports that contain things like conditional formatting, and that the reason for that is to make the data really stand out. So we're not just sort of seeing black and white data being displayed in a grid format. We're looking at things like, if we're running out of stock on a particular item, we need that highlighted so we can actually make a business decision against it. Or if we've got tasks from a SharePoint list that are high priority or have to be completed to today, that's something else that we can also expose using some conditional formatting. And then we're going to look at building some charts, and there's all sorts of different charts that you can create. We've got pie charts, there's line and bar and column charts that we can create. We've also now got tree maps and gauges to add to that too. So these are things that you can easily configure inside of your SharePoint environment. And like I said, you can also consume connections from other web parts. Now we're going to consume a connection from Lightning Filters and the Lightning Conductor. You can also connect multiple data viewers together, which I'm going to be demonstrating. But also, if you wanted to build your own custom web part that maybe got data from somewhere and you wanted that to be able to connect to the data viewer for charting purposes, that's something that you could also do as well. Okay, so steps to displaying data in a report, there's three main steps really. One of them is to configure the connection, which we're going to take a look at. So depending on the data source you're connecting to, there'll of course be parameters that are specific to accomplishing this. So if you wanted to, for example, connect to a SharePoint list, we would browse out to that SharePoint list using our tree view control. If you wanted to connect to an Excel document, then we could browse out to a document library that contains that Excel file. And if it's SQL and so on, of course, you'll provide the name of the SQL server and the username and password that we're going to use to authenticate. So we'll configure the connection. You'll then select the tables and the columns that you want to present inside the web part, and then you can go through and apply any data formatting and conditional formatting and grouping and that type of thing. You can even create calculated columns and that type of idea to get the values that you want. So let's take a look at the data viewer in action. So what I'm going to do is jump into SharePoint first of all, and we'll build a connection against the SQL Azure database, and we'll also create another connection to an OData database as well. And I'll show you how we can do some of this conditional formatting and grouping and what have you. So here we are inside of SharePoint, and I'm going to sort of work with the sales kind of environment here. So I'm inside a sales team, and if I go to the pages inside of my sales team, you'll see that I've got a few different pages here, all about the data viewer and so on. Now, these web parts could absolutely be displayed on the home page. So if you had your sales revenue, or you want to display a chart showing the sales revenue and the sales target for this month or this quarter or something, and you wanted that to be the first thing people see when they come into their SharePoint site for sales, then we can absolutely do that. You can edit the page and you can drop the data viewer right onto this page here. Just so I've got more room to play with, I'm going to do that on a standard SharePoint page. So I'm going to go back here to the SharePoint page, and we're going to jump into this page first of all, which I've named the Data Viewer SQL Azure Database. And you can see that I've got a couple of charts already created, and this is using the Data Viewer. And I'll talk you through how some of these have been configured, but also I'm going to actually go in and create a brand new data viewer instance and connect that to the SQL Azure database. So I've configured this section here to basically give me two columns. So if you didn't know, inside of SharePoint, you can basically add these sections on a web part page. Sorry, that's adding a web part. You can add a section here, and then you can choose how many columns you want inside that section. So when you're building a dashboard, it's useful to actually have some side-by-side tiles, if you like, so we can create multiple data viewers next to each other. But what I'm going to do is actually just drop the data viewer in directly beneath this tree map. So we'll go through and select it, and you'll see here that we get the data viewer side panel open, and we can go through and create views, which is a brand new feature, but I'll talk about that a little bit later on, or we can just hit configure at the bottom here inside the web part. And when we're inside the dialog to configure the web part, you'll notice that we've got the data sources here. So the data sources are SharePoint lists. We can also go against business connectivity services. As I mentioned, if we have the external content type name, we can use that. We can go against the OData, SQL Azure, Excel, and also another web part. So that's where we could consume the connection from another web part and display a chart or a report against its content. So in order to kick off this one, we're going to go with the SQL Azure, and immediately beneath that, we can choose the display provider. So there's two display providers. One is the grid view, which is a row and column format, where we can choose our columns and column sizes and that type of thing, or we can go through and build the chart. And you're going to see both of these today, but we're going to jump into the grid view first of all. So you can restrict the number of items coming back. So I could limit that if I wanted to. I'm going to leave this unlimited. And we can also have a data refresh interval set as well. So if I leave this as 0, I literally have to refresh the page to bring in the data, if you like, or redisplay the data. But I could, if I wanted to have a kiosk type environment, set a interval, which may be 60 seconds or something like that. So every 60 seconds, it's going to refresh the data. And go that way. And unlike Power BI, there's no limit to how many times that can happen. That could happen as many times as you want it to throughout the day. So on the data source tab here, this is where I'm going to connect to my server. So I'm going to just simply paste this in. Sorry, no, I'm not. I'm actually going to go and steal that because I had that on my clipboard ready to go. I'm going to steal it from this one. There we go. Sorry, that's just not sitting in my head for some reason. So let's just go through and choose the SQL Azure again and drop in the path to my SQL Server, which is in SQL Azure. And I'll load the entities here. And just if you do have a SQL on-premises database or an Oracle database or anything like that, there are other companies that are vendors for tools that will synchronize with SQL Azure so that you can also get that data more easily in the cloud. So that's another alternative to using OData as well. Now I'm going to go against the AdventureWorks database in here. And once we've selected the database that I want to work with, I've got a choice of the different tables and views within inside that database. So we can clearly see the views here or the tables that I can connect to. So I want to just bring back a list of products. So I'm going to choose the product table. And then when we go to the columns tab here, notice that I can simply go through and select the columns that I want to display. And we've done a lot of that hard work for connecting to each of these columns. We've worked out the data type and so on. So we can simply go through and choose these and display them in our grid view. So once I've chosen the columns, notice that you can also, as I mentioned, add some calculated columns as well. So if I wanted not just a standard cost and list price, but maybe I wanted to show the sales tax as an example. So I could just reel that off rather than doing the calculation in my head. I'm going to choose the column type for that one, which in this case is going to be a double. And I can create my calculation, which may be something like the list price multiplied by 0.2 or whatever it might be. So we'll calculate that, and then I can display that and maybe drop that right next to the price field in my view. And for each of these, we can go through and set the display format. So we've got the list price and the sales tax now, which are actually currency columns. So we can format those as such. And of course, any other data formatting that we might want to do throughout each of these columns. And then we have the choice of setting colors and formatting, and there's lots of other properties that's sitting behind each of these that we can also go through and set if we want to. And since this is a SQL Azure database, I can also allow the insert, update, and delete. So what I'm going to do is just allow the update on that one and click save. And what you'll see here is that the data comes back from my SQL Azure database and, like I say, is displayed inside my grid. With a bit of luck. If ever I see that, it's usually a mistake in my calculated column. I'm just going to remove that out because otherwise that should have displayed straight away. Let's just republish. Yeah, there we go. So here's my my data coming back from that SQL Azure database, and it's displayed here alongside some charts and what have you on the same page. So that's going against the SQL Azure database. Let's take a look now at OData. So what I'm going to do is just come into this data viewer page, and again you can see some examples that I've built already. So we've got some charts, another tree map, and also a grid view. So if we wanted to build on that, at the top here we'll go through and configure another instance of the data viewer, and for this I'm going to use a sample data service. This is coming from OData.org, which is a great place to practice at all of this. If you reach out to OData.org, there's all sorts of web services that you can connect to that are exposing data. So I'm just using this Northwind example here. So it's enough data for me to actually build some good data reports. And sorry, let me find out where I was. There we are. And this time we'll go through and select the OData service in a grid view again, and I'll drop in that service URL and load the entities. And this is something that you could provide credentials if it required it. Mine doesn't, so I'm just going to go with this one. So again, I'm going to choose products, and we'll choose some of these. So these are just slightly different products. This is more sort of food and beverages, as opposed to the other one being bicycles. But we'll select these columns here. And under display, again, we'll go through and set things like the unit price as a currency and things like that. Okay, so once we've got that created, I want to show you how we can also start to highlight some of this data. So we've got the units in stock, which some of these you can see are 0, and the units on order are also 0. So under the units in stock, I can simply hit the drop down, come down to the column settings and click formatting. And we can basically say that if the units in stock is below a certain level, so maybe below 3, then we can go through and apply a style color or something like that. So in here we could select some colors. We've got the font colors, we've got background colors that we can go through and set, or we could also choose icons and things like this if we wanted to. And I prefer to do that. So I'm going to basically use a KPI indicator, and we'll set the color to be red and hit save. So I'm going to just position that to the left of the value. So as you'll see, we've got that now, and we could also go through and add another row of conditional formatting where the units in stock is greater than or equal to 3, and we can set an icon for that too. So this time we'll choose a green. You probably predicted that. And what I could do is also set this to only show the icon. So that just gives us, okay, just completely ignored what I did. I must have accidentally hit cancel. I apologize. So let's just try that one more time. So units in stock greater than or equal to 3 is going to be a green icon. There we go. So we've got that, and we'll set this one to only the icon as well. And we'll make sure that we hit save this time. There we go. And yeah, as you can see, we're now seeing clearly what we have in stock and what we don't have in stock. And that could also be a data bar or something. So if I just clear that conditional formatting, and we'll remove these entries in here, add a new conditional style, which actually doesn't need to be conditional, and we could set a data bar control to give me an indication also as to how much stock there is. So another way of sort of visualizing that data. Okay, so that's the sort of first demonstration, is just how we can connect to those and display a grid of data from a data source inside of SharePoint. So building charts, similar thing. We can configure our connection to lots of different data sources, select the columns that we want to use inside of our chart, and then there's various different types of charts that you can choose from, and properties that you can set on each one. So what we're going to do here is go against that same OData service with the Northwind database, and we'll build some charts. And then I'm also going to show you against an Excel document as well that's living here inside of SharePoint. So we'll jump back in, and on the same page here, let's just add another new instance of the data viewer. In fact, we can create a couple here. And when we hit configure, one more time, I'll choose the OData service, but we're going to change the output to be a chart view as opposed to a grid view. And the data source will drop in, load the entities one more time, and now we're getting all of the different tables and views that are available. So there's several that we can choose. Notice that we've got the sales totals by amounts. This is a view that's already been created for me, or I've got a summary of sales per quarter and things like that that I can utilize. So I'll just use one of the existing views. And when we go to the column view, notice that we've got inside this view, we've got the shipped date and the sale amount. And that's actually what I'm going to work with, is these two columns here. So I don't need to worry about the order of these or anything like that, because I'm simply going to chart this. So when we go to the display, this is what we get. It's just a random chart. It doesn't yet know what I want to use as my x-axis and things like this. So what I'm going to do is just switch that out to the shipped date. And again, I don't necessarily need to see this against every single day. So I'm going to group by the shipped date. And in here, we can then choose whether we want to show this per day, per month, per year, or per quarter, and so on, and have our data represented in that way. And you can see the aggregate function that is going against the sale amount column then, which has defaulted to sum, which is exactly what I wanted it to do. But if I wanted to maybe show the count of orders instead of the sum of the orders, of course, I could have done that as well with the count. Okay, so that's showing the sale amount on here. We can go through and style that. So if we don't want to use a line and we want to use a column instead, we can do so. I like to also pick on a theme color. So that way, as people change the theme applied to the SharePoint page, that's going to be reflected in my chart as well. And my chart will blend in nicely. And we can hit save on that, and there's our chart being displayed. And you've also got some other chart settings in here too. So you can provide a title for your chart. So we could have revenue per quarter. You can choose where the legend is. You can set background colors and things like that. And also have the bar chart horizontal or vertical and that type of thing too. Okay, so once we hit save, there's a simple chart on the page that remains dynamic. So as I mentioned, as we add more orders to a particular quarter, that's going to be reflected inside our chart without us having to go through and manipulate any data or anything like that. And if you want to make this look more sort of dashboardy, you can also get rid of each of the different options on there. So reaching out to our help documentation and exporting data and things like that can all be hidden. Okay, so that's one of the charts that we can create. And what I'm going to do is also just go through and configure that again. So we'll once more select an OData service. In a chart view, we'll drop in the same service URL. And as we come down here, we can choose the sales totals by amounts again. And what I want to do this time is just add in a new column. So it could be profit or something like that. It could be freight cost or storage costs, anything along those lines. So if you know your manufacturing cost. And then what I'm going to do here is just insert that sale amount field and multiply that to give me a profit. So I've now got sale amount profit. And I'm going to choose company name this time as opposed to shipped date. Okay, so now we can group by the company. The profit, I'm going to show that in a nice bright green color. And the sale amount, we'll go with the theme color, and we'll put that into a column format. Okay, so there we go. We've again very easily generated a chart that is dynamic and displayed on our SharePoint page. Okay, so that's using OData, obviously. Now, typically you might want to use Excel or something like that, not necessarily an external data source. So I've got a simple Excel document that I'm going to work with, and that also shows some sales revenue. So I'm going to go into this new page here called Data Viewer Excel. We'll edit the page, and as you can see, I've got two different columns. So we'll drop in a data viewer on the left-hand side, and what I'm going to do is choose Microsoft Excel as my data source. I'm going to go with a grid view first of all, so you can see the data that we're connecting to, and we now get to navigate our SharePoint environment for that Excel file. So it's in the current site, which is always shown at the top, or current site collection rather, and I can drill into that site collection, choose the document library where the Excel file exists, and then we can basically go through and select that file. So we're filtering out all the Excel documents from that document library, and I'm going to choose this one here called sales revenue. So the data viewer will automatically detect the sheets with data on them. So if you had 3 sheets, you're going to see sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, or whatever you labeled them as. So I'm going to choose the first sheet, and notice it then detects the data on there. So if you've got a table, you can go through and select that table by name or by range. So I'm going to go with the by range, and hit save, and it will have gotten that data for me. And now I can just choose the columns. So these are my column headers, and we can choose the display where we may do some, like I say, data formatting and that type of thing on there. So as we hit save on that, there's our simple data coming in from that Excel workbook. So now I'm saving the hassle of somebody having to go into the document library, find the file, open it, and maybe get an update of the sales number. They can just simply go to the page, and that's it. They've got the sales number and how they're doing against target. And of course, that's not very visual. So what we could then do is add another instance using this time a chart view against the Excel document. And so I'll go through and select that Excel file again. So same range of data. I'll select all 3 columns and hit display. And here is our chart. So again, sales revenue could be theme color. You can tell I like to do that. And maybe column, target will blend in with a nice lime green this time. There we go. Okay, so we've now got our data, and that's backed up with a chart on the page as well. Okay, so that's connecting to an Excel document, which is nice and easy. It can be published, and anybody that has a SharePoint license or is an external user will be able to see this data on the page without having to sort of worry about licensing each of those users with a separate license. All right, so that's working with Excel. And what we'll do in a moment is just have a look at some other different chart types as well. So some of the other products that the data viewer can work with that we provide at Lightning Tools includes the social squared discussion board. So this is literally a discussion board that can be displayed inside of SharePoint or can be displayed inside of Teams, and that helps users be able to ask questions and reply to each other as a subject matter expert, and see that in a sort of organized fashion as opposed to a continual feed on the posts tab. So they can navigate the forum groups in the forums or search the forums in order to see a question or to obviously reply to questions or post new questions. So what we want to do here is maybe measure how well that's being adopted, so we can see how many people are actually using social squared inside a team. We can see maybe how many unanswered questions we have, or who's the biggest contributor of questions, or who's the biggest responder based in terms of how many badges do they have and that type of thing, and basically be able to report across all of that content. So we have that as a scenario. We've also got the Lightning Conductor, which is the content aggregation tool. So you can roll up lists and libraries, and we can chart against that as well, which I'll demonstrate. And you can also build the charts on the graph entities as well. So if you wanted to connect to something like OneDrive or to Planner and build a chart based on that content, that's something else that you could also do. And then we've also got Lightning Forms, which is our tool that can be used to customize the standard SharePoint list forms, so you can add some more business logic and behaviors to those forms as well. So we could use the data viewer in order to be able to chart against the form content that we've collected using Lightning Forms. And there's also the free product that we have, which is known as Lightning Filters, that can be providing filters to the Lightning Conductor and also to the data viewer, which is great on a dashboard to be able to accomplish that. So let's have a look at how the data viewer can be used against some of these other products. So what I'm going to do here is just jump back into SharePoint. In fact, sorry, I'm going to jump into Teams. So here inside of Teams, you'll see I've got Social Squared as a tab inside this technical support team. And rather than using the posts tab in here, where people can ask their questions and so on, and maybe get interrupted by people putting GIFs in there and that type of thing, what we can do is have a more sort of structured discussion board, where if I had a question about Teams, I could go into the Teams forum group. If I had a question about SharePoint, I could go into the relevant one for that, and likewise with Viva and so on. So in here, people can go through and post a new question, they can reply to each other and that type of thing. So Data Viewer comes into play if we want to report against that. And you can see here we've got the, so let me just refresh that because I think my page is lagging a little. Hopefully my voice is coming across clearly. There we go. So yeah, in here we've got lots of different charts created that's basically showing me how well that discussion board is performing. So in here we've got the tree map. The tree map is showing the popularity of the tags. So every time you create a post, you can tag it with a keyword. That can also come from your managed metadata or just free tagging. So in here we can see that actually there's 17 posts that have the SharePoint tag, and next to that is SharePoint 2019 tag, which has been used 6 times, and so on. So it's a great way of just sort of mapping something on a tree map. So obviously the bigger the square, the more that tag has been used. Over on the right here, we've got the number of topics, likes, and votes, and that's per month. So we can see that content being mapped out. We have the number of posts per forum, which is useful to see, number of topics per user that has been created, and then we've also got the number of user badges displayed inside a gauge. And this is all the data viewer powering all of this. So if we just edit this page and have a look at some of that, if we take a look at the tree map, first of all, and configure it, you can see that it's going against the SharePoint list and configuring the view in a charts view. And that SharePoint list is basically this tag cloud list, which Social Squared uses. We've chosen the columns of being value and count from that list. And then on the display, we've selected the tree map from the drop down. So a moment ago, you only saw the combo maps, combo charts, whereas now I've got a tree map chosen, and we can go through and configure all of that. So if we wanted to change the different square colors and so on, we can do so. And you can choose whether you want to have this scale legend displayed as well, which is obviously useful to see. You've already seen one of these, so I'm going to jump into this one, the pie chart, and have a look at that. So in here again, you can see this is going against the SharePoint list, and the list this time is this SS_forums. We've then got the title and the posts selected as 2 different columns, and on the display here, we're basically doing a count of each of those to give us a percentage as to how many of those are appearing. And again, you can go through and control whether that's 3D or 2D. You can have a whole radius and things like that inside the chart if you want to, and that type of thing. So really useful to be able to do that on that content. And then we've also got the gauges down here as well. So if you wanted to have gauges, again, it's connecting to a SharePoint list. The display this time is a gauge. So with that, you need to have a target type column and a current value column. So you can see my target is calculated here, but we could also have a count of how many items there are. So that's reporting against Social Squared. So you can create these reports however you want to be able to see how well that Social Squared tool is being adopted inside your environment. So let's jump onto another product, and we could again do this inside of Teams, or we could also do it inside of SharePoint, but I'm going to do it inside of SharePoint. So we're going to go into the Lightning Conductor page that I have here. And on the Lightning Conductor page, you can see I'm doing a little aggregation of some tasks. And so these tasks we can see inside the Lightning Conductor. But what I could do is add a chart on here using the data viewer. And I'm going to tell it to go against a web part connection and choose the chart view. So the data source is going to be the connection to the Lightning Conductor. So we'll configure that, and then I'm going to work with the retrieved items as opposed to selected items. So you can actually select individual rows and that form the basis of your chart, or I can choose the whole table as the data source. And so this is now showing me all of the columns that the Lightning Conductor has access to for those lists. And what I could do is choose something like the priority and the ID. So that's the unique ID for the list. And then under display, I'm going to change this to a pie. And you can see here we've now got the percentage of high, low, or normal priority tasks. So we'll just group those and set that to sum. And again, I could make that 3D if I wanted to, and I could change the colors and whatnot. So there we go. We've got a chart now showing that aggregated content as a chart, which is useful. And the cool thing about this is if we start to filter on the Lightning Conductor, the chart will reflect that filter as well, because it is literally just going against what's displayed on the page. Okay, so that's how we can use it with the Lightning Conductor. Now let's take a look at another scenario. So what I have inside this site is an expense report list. And that expense report list has a customized form, and the form was customized using Lightning Forms. So you'll see that this doesn't actually reflect the standard look and feel. So let me just edit this one. Shouldn't be displaying in full screen. But anyway, it's a customized form. So we've got 3 different tabs in here, which we've created using Lightning Forms. We've also got a sublist, which is known as expense items. So what we can do with that is join effectively 2 different lists together. And let me just refresh that one again and hit new. Yeah, there we go. So if we were to create a new expense claim, we can now fill these tabs out and start adding in our expense items. So here's a good reflection of how that looks. If I go into my expense claim, you can see I've got 3 expenses inside this one expense report that's waiting for approval. So we can absolutely chart that as well, or display that in a grid, in a view. So what we'll do is open up my page. So we should have a page here for expenses. There we go. And in this example, I'm going to show you how we can join 2 different data viewers together. So I'm going to add 2 different data viewers onto the page here. And the first one, I'm going to configure against a SharePoint list this time. And the SharePoint list is inside the current site, and it's called expense report. We'll choose the columns. So I'm going to select the last name, the first name, the email, and I want to have whether it's approved, who it's approved by, when it was approved, and total expenses. Okay, so we'll drop those on the view here, and I'm going to enable the selecting of rows. So when I save this, I can actually go through and select a row like that. Okay, and now we're going to go through and configure the second instance, which is also going to be against a SharePoint list, but this time it's going to be the expense items. So we'll choose the title. In fact, no, we won't. We're going to choose the lookup to expense report. Sorry, we're going to have the category, the claim amount, cost center, etc. Maybe data expense as well. So we can embed those on the same page. So now we've got each of those items being displayed. And now I'm going to connect this one using a filter against this lookup to expense report. And we're going to connect that to the other data viewer instance using the selected items. And we're going to pass through the last name. Okay, so yeah, there's no items to show because I didn't select any. If I select Lonsdale, there's the expenses for Lonsdale. If I also add Warburton, we're getting the expenses for Warburton, and so on. So this would also work inside a chart. You can display a chart in response to something that you selected. And of course, I could go through and tidy this up a little bit by formatting the columns into currency and that type of thing too. Okay, so that's another use of the Lightning Conductor. Of the data viewer. And we can also, as I mentioned, use the filters web part in conjunction with this too. So if there was a number filter or a date filter, even choice filter or anything like that, that we wanted to pass that connection through to the data viewer, we could also accomplish that requirement as well. So the next thing I just want to talk about is what's new. So of course, we've got the tree map and the gauge controls that you saw when we were reporting against Social Squared, but we've also brought this more in line with the Lightning Conductor. So it's very similar. If you already use the Lightning Conductor, you will notice that some of the behaviors are more in line with that. The look and feel of the product is more in line with the Lightning Conductor as well, albeit it's very different. The Lightning Conductor is obviously an aggregation tool that works with the graph and so on. This is a tool that works against external data sources and therefore has completely different logic, even though it looks similar. The new feature that I'm about to show you here is the multiple views, which if you are familiar with the Lightning Conductor, you've had this for quite some time, but it's new to the data viewer. And this is especially useful inside of Teams. So I'm just going to jump back into Teams here. And we'll open up the sales site. I already have a data viewer added, but I'm just going to add it again so you can see how this can be done. So I'm adding the data viewer. And now I can actually go through and label my views. So what I could have is, a sales revenue by month. And I could also have sales revenue by quarter. And these can be individual views that I now get a drop down for. So we'll configure the first one. And so again, I'm just going to go against the OData service for this. And so we'll have the sales totals by amount. And we'll group this on the ship date and show it by month. And for the other one, these can be completely different data sources. They're totally independent views. Just so happens mine's going to be the same data source. Okay, so this time we're going to just change this to quarter. And there we go. So so now on this one tab, we've actually got the ability to view the content how we want by using that drop down. So that's the limitation overcome of Teams, where it's only showing one web part per tab, is we can actually have multiple views inside that same tab. Okay, so at that point, I'm going to open up for questions. And if you want to, you can use the Q&A panel. So inside of Zoom here, you've got the ability to post a question. So if you do have a question, feel free to post it, and we can read that out. And also you can use the chat panel as well if you can't find any questions that come to mind. If something comes to mind at a later date, feel free to reach out to us as well on brett@lightningtools.com. So if there's any technical questions that you might have, you can reach out to me, or support@lightningtools.com as well. Or you can also reach out to sales@lightningtools.com also. So let's see, we should have Sandy Usia on the call.
Hello.
Hey, Sandy. So yeah, I think you may have a question if you wanted to kick off with that, and I'll do my best to answer.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we had one come in. Someone was wondering if it's possible to kind of copy some of that configuration from one data viewer to another, like you were doing over and over, having to connect to the same service and so on. But could you copy some of that instead of having to do it over again?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, we've got that same functionality inside of SharePoint as well. But yeah, a good example of that actually inside of Teams here would be, I've got my two different views. That's displayed currently on the general channel, but maybe I actually want to show this inside another channel inside that same team. So yeah, when we go into the settings and we expose the panel here, you have the ability to import or export views. So I could export this view out. So you can see down here we get the JSON effectively for that configuration, and that would allow me to go into a different team or add a different instance. So if I went into this technical support team as an example, rather than the sales team, I could add the data viewer here. In case we get a fresh instance of the data viewer, and then I can simply go through and import my file, which will be in my downloads. There it is, and import that. And we've got that same chart then displayed in a separate team. So of course, yeah, as we mentioned, we're overcoming silos of data here inside an organization. So those silos could be exposed through charts and reports in different teams. And yeah, you don't have to keep on reconfiguring that same file all the time. So yeah, absolutely, that's something you could accomplish.
That's great. That's the only question I see so far.
All right, perfect. So anybody, if you have another question, feel free to ask. If not, I'll just fill for a moment. What I'm going to fill with is just, if you do own already the Lightning Conductor or Social Squared or Lightning Forms or anything like that, we do now offer some suites of our products. So you'll find these on the lightningtools.com website. So you can add the data viewer to most of these products as well. So on the Lightning Conductor, for example, here's the suites on the right hand side, but I'm just going to go to this page and show you that under the pricing for the Lightning Conductor, you'll also have the Lightning Conductor Plus, which gives you a discounted rate for the data viewer. So if you did want to use it in conjunction with the Lightning Conductor, you don't have to pay full price for the data viewer. And that goes for the other products as well, for things like Social Squared Plus reporting and so on. That's also using the data viewer for that purpose. But over here on the right hand side is also some suites as well. So we've got things like the Form Designer suite, the Sharing Collaboration suite, and so on. And yeah, the data viewer can be incorporated with those as well. So yeah, just feel free to reach out to us if you are an existing customer and you like the capabilities that you've seen and you want to add that to your environment. That said, I'm still not seeing any other questions. Or sorry, did you have one?
Well, I was just going to say, but people can buy it on its own as well.
Exactly. Yes. So so the data viewer is an independent product on its own right. It doesn't rely on these other products. So yeah, you can use the data viewer on its own in Teams or inside of SharePoint. And once again, if you joined late, it's not just for SharePoint Online, but also for SharePoint 2019 on premises as well. If you have got a older version of SharePoint on premises, such as SharePoint 2016 or 2013, there is also a WSP version of the data viewer that can be used inside of that scenario.
Great.
All right, fantastic. Well, at that point then, I will thank everybody for attending, and this is our last webinar of the year. We do have some webinars coming up next year, so that in January we're going to have a webinar on Lightning Forms, where we've got a brand new exciting release where we've provided more functionality and a new improved action builder that you'll see inside of Lightning List Actions and also the Lightning Forms. And then we've also got Social Squared coming up in February as well, where we've got some exciting enhancements there and a completely new user interface. So look out for those webinars being advertised. And until now and then, wish you all a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And thank you very much for joining.